Where's my, I'm missing a council member. Oh, okay. Mr. Collins racing through. Okay, good evening. Welcome to the City of San Carlos City Council Successor Agency to the Redevelopment Agency / Housing Authority regular meeting of March 12, 2018. Would you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. All right, are there any changes to the order of the agenda?
Nothing from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody from the dais want to move it around? Okay. Mr. Rubens, is there any report from closed session?
There's no report, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Number 5 is public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on items not on the posted agenda. I do not have any cards. Is there anyone wishing to speak on any item not on the posted agenda? All right, we'll move on. Item 6 is consent calendar. Consent calendar items are usually done in one motion. I'll listen for a motion from the dais.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of consent calendar items A through F.
I second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right, roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right, item 7, reports to council. Reports to councils are updates on key city projects by city department heads and staff and city council subcommittees. They are informational in nature, and no action will be taken on these items at this meeting. 7A is a report to council on upcoming Adopt a Unit activities. Chief Rothus. Can we still call you Chief Rothus? Or?
I think we have to call him Sheriff Rothus.
No, but I mean, when is it official that you're not our chief anymore?
I'm still the chief. I'm going to be reporting out. Good evening, Council, Mayor Grisilli, members of the City Council. Greg Rothus. I'm still the chief. I will be until on or about the 26th is when I'm going to give my annual report to council. So I'll be back before you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I have, I think, at least 3 items on the agenda that night. So a big police night. And the new police chief, Mark Dury, who happens to be here on the gun item tonight to help if there's any need for that support, he'll also he'll be there as well, and will probably be introduced at that time.
Okay. Welcome. Welcome, Mark, also.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Probably last year, sometime early last year, the City Council decided to participate in the Adopt a Unit program in support of the 101st Airborne Division of the Screaming Eagles. And let me give a little bit of background on that. It's the weekend of March 23rd, marks the 50th anniversary of this program, and that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. It was actually started in 1967. A sergeant by the name of Joe Artavia wrote his sister. Joe was in Vietnam with his unit, and I think some things back home were not great, and he was looking for some support from back home. And so his sister decided that they would adopt his unit, and that's how the program started 50 years ago. Linda Patterson, and she's still involved in the program today, and she's still helping shepherd it along. And so what the Adopt a Unit program does, and San Carlos does participate in it, and we've just started, so we're kind of still at the point of fundraising and gathering funds. But it's essentially when the troops are deployed overseas, there's just, you'd be surprised at how many of the conveniences and things that they can't get, whether it's a good shaving cream, whether it's shoelaces or just snacks and things to eat, just getting care packages out to the troops, especially around the holidays and those kinds of things. And the community participates, their kids get involved, and everyone gets involved. So the weekend of the 23rd is going to be when that's going to be celebrated here in San Mateo County. Each city is going to participate and have their own thing and do their own event. And in the city of San Carlos on Friday, March 23rd, Hiller Aviation Museum is going to open their doors for free to the public. We are going to have members of the 101st Airborne Division come, not the whole division, obviously. We'll just have a few, maybe 5 or so. They'll show up to represent that division. They'll be there along with members of the public. There's going to be some sort of a meet and greet somewhere around the 4 o'clock hour. And at that point, Mayor Bob Grisilli will say a few words and recognize the division. And so we just wanted to get this information out in front of the public, let them know they're welcome to come, bring their families, and it's free of charge. And we hope they'll come down and support the troops in that event.
All right, thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. I'll be there.
Okay.
The next item on our agenda is item 7B, report to council on the city's reserves, unfunded pension liabilities, and unfunded capital projects. Is Ms. Mendenhall?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Rebecca Mendenhall, Administrative Services Director. Before you tonight is a discussion on the city's reserve balances and the unfunded liabilities. Last June, the city hired NHA Financial Advisors as our on-call financial advisor. They've been helping us evaluate our reserves, specifically our unfunded liability reserve and options on how we can reduce those liabilities. Craig Hill from NHA is here tonight to present those findings. Since this is just a report to council, any recommendations would be brought back at a future date. So I'll turn it over to Craig.
Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council.
We only want, by the way, good news, so if you have bad news, just stop right now.
It's all good news.
Good, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I won't throw any of the other cities under the bus, so you guys are in great shape. Again, Craig Hill, NHA Advisors. We've been working with the city now for since last year on this particular project, but off and on over the last 5 years. So really, as was already addressed, we're going to tackle two things. One, from a capital or from a reserve perspective, what you've got, the different buckets that you've got, and then what your liabilities are. And as you and many other city councils around the state are always asking the question, what should we be doing with these fund balances? Do you hold on to all of them for a rainy day, or do you apply them towards known, deferred capital or unfunded liabilities such as pensions? So let's start with the current reserve levels. You all were provided with a staff report, which also included our memo that was done based on the analysis we had looked at earlier. And for the most part, the great news for the city is that your financial position is very strong. Even in the community or in the peninsula with all of your competing cities, your numbers are still exceptionally high. The fund balances that you have, which you've got designated into different buckets, are all on the higher end of the threshold. And we'll show you that in a second with one of the other ones. But as of March, you've got a committed fund balance of almost 15 million. You've got an unassigned balance of around 2. You've got the assigned general fund balance of around 12 million. You've got right now an economic uncertainty, so that is usually the one that we as financial types look at, because that's the one that really is your rainy day fund that's currently has a goal of 20%, and the fund is increasing right now. So right now you're working at about 12.5%, or a fund balance of about 5.2. The graphic over on the right is really just a demonstration of where the different buckets are that you've got. How do you compare? Everybody always wants to know how you are against your different peer groups. Your fund balance was 95% of expenses as of the end of your last CAFR, so that would have been June of 17.
I apologize, CAFR. I know what it is, but the world doesn't know.
Your financial reports, your audited financial reports.
Thank you.
And currently, as of March, that number is down at around 71%. That's obviously because you're moving forward on some major capital projects that are now deploying some of the funds that you have on hand. Utilizing reserves for capital projects or for pension liabilities. It's the big question. We're spending a lot of time with a lot of other cities right now trying to figure out the higher priority or the best priority for fund balances. Again, you're starting with the ability that you have fund balances. So that puts you in the immediate ability to actually answer this question. So with almost $29 million in capital projects identified. This is stuff that the council has already addressed, and you've already applied some of these fund balances to the Holly Street project, so we don't really need to go into this. This was work we were doing as at the end of last year. This presentation was intended to be a little bit earlier, so I apologize for information that you've already taken action on. Now, on the pension and other liability side, you've got 3 buckets, as you're all aware. You have CalPERS right now with an unfunded liability of about $55 million. You've got a PARS longevity plan with an unfunded liability of about $9 million, and you have OPEB of about $3.7 million.
Going after you on these. OPEB is,
So those are post-retirement benefits such as medical.
make sure everybody understands
Yep.
that's listening to this.
No, I appreciate the questions. That's
Okay,
good.
thanks.
So one of the things that people like.
Excuse me,
Oh, sir.
Mr. Mayor, through the chair. We have PERS. Can you tell me what PARS is?
So PARS is a trust administrator that is separate from the state that actually runs a private trust for you for the longevity. So these are all 3 different benefit packages, and they're actually run by different organizations, CalPERS obviously being the state.
What does PARS actually stand for? Do we know?
Public Agency Retirement System.
Thank you.
One other clarifying question, I may have misheard you when you were talking about CalPERS. The chart shows $54.5 million total, and then underneath it, it's roughly 2/3 funded. So I presume that that means the unfunded portion is about 1/3 of the $55 million? Is that how I would interpret that?
Yes. So the way that when you talk about unfunded liabilities, it's a balance sheet, right? There's assets and liabilities. So the way that the actuaries will calculate your existing employees that are in the system, they will say that the gap, if you will, is $54 million between the assets and the liabilities. It's the differential. It's not the actual bucket, if that makes any sense.
I don't understand the relationship between 55 million and 66% funded then.
So, yeah, let me try to.
And frankly, the reason I'm asking is because I thought I knew roughly what the number was. And in the unfunded portion, in my recollection, was never anywhere near $55 million. It was closer to about 18, which would be about 1/3 of it. But I'm happy to be corrected. I just want to make sure I understand what I'm
Okay,
saying.
yeah, I'll need to go back and look at some of my notes to correct that.
I'm just, it's this, you get some numbers people up here actually understand a couple of these things.
Sure.
So we're funded. What's the percentage of funded, and what's the amount funded then? Is it 36 million? Is it 54 million? What is the number?
That's the same question.
I know. What is the number? Rebecca, what's the number?
So this is the amount, if you wanted to pay off your liability today, this is the amount you would have to come up with. So
So in other words, we basically then we have 150 million funded,
you have,
because the third we don't have unfunded is 54.
correct.
Okay, so approximately total of 200. Ballpark, we've got 150 that we're funded. Is that right? Because that's what you're telling me.
Right, no.
Yes, because I'm subtracting 66 from 100, and I get like you were saying.
Right, 1/3 of your total is not funded.
And the third is 54 million.
Correct.
Okay, which doesn't
So it's 150 million.
tie up to what you were. No.
And possibly if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of this slide and you start to see some of the individual numbers for plans, perhaps the reason one of the other numbers is pretty close to that's jogging your memory is if we were talking about like the miscellaneous plan or one of the others. But, you know, I know from past iterations, this is actually kind of a favorable number from the Belmont San Carlos Fire perspective from some of the numbers we saw 5 years ago, so that were higher than the 54 million.
I anticipate we'll have some more in-depth discussions.
I agree.
So there's 2 specific variables that we address when we look at any of these pension liabilities. The one is the funded level. So how funded are you? So the conversation we were having about the 61 to 66%. And the other one is what is the actual annual contribution? Because that's the one that's affecting the budget. That's the one that you're programming into your financials. For the CalPERS contribution, it's just about $4.5 million a year. And that is, you're 100% funding your ARC, which means you are staying exactly with what CalPERS is asking you to do. You're not amortizing it out any further.
I'm sorry, ARC. apologize, but you're just going to have to detail out what these, I know it's very funny, but it isn't funny to the people listening.
Sure.
So you need to get rid of the acronyms and please describe, only say it once, but
Yep.
say it once, please, okay?
So-
I don't want to ask again.
Sure. So that is the annual requirement contribution. So on the longevity plan, again, that's the one that's fairly new. You're only at 16% right now. You're making contributions of just inside of $500,000 a year. And the last one is the OPEB plan, which you are about 25% funded, and those contributions are about $400,000. Okay, so those are the budgetary numbers that you would see in any of your budget work that you're doing now.
Question. So go back to where you just were then. So you've got one of these, the 54.5 is 2/3 funded. The PARS is 16 and the other is 25%. So if you wanted to figure out what is the total unfunded, you'd have to do the math on each one of those and then add it up. Have you done that on here?
We have that in our model, but I don't have it.
But it's not on this
no.
slide or any of the next slides.
And just some background on why those numbers are a lot lower. Those are newer plans. I mean, CalPERS has been around forever and the city has been contributing for a very long time. The longevity and the OPEB are more recent plans and where there was identified unfunded liabilities. So the city, along with a lot of other cities, is just now starting to try to tackle those liabilities. And that's why it's not uncommon to see the funding levels really low on those types of liabilities.
Okay, and all these that you're showing us is under the assumption the same that the state has on what estimated returns are on investment, which is about 7.5%, I think.
7.25. So these are snapshots in time, right? So these are all as of the last reports that were provided by the actuaries.
But the underlying assumption is 7.25?
7.25 this year for CalPERS, correct? But not for the others? The PARS and OPEB work under a different model, so they don't have that designated hard number like you always hear when all the reports and all the news that you're hearing is specific to CalPERS. The OPEB.
Do they have a number, or do you have a number of what actual return on investment is?
For the other two?
For the PARS, it assumes.
No, for PERS.
For PERS?
PERS is making an assumption of 7.25, but they're not getting 7.25.
Fiscal year, I can't remember.
Half year, 16% already.
Yeah. The PARS fund estimates about a 4% return, and the OPEB plan is 7.25.
Now, you just threw out 16 for PERS, but that's a snapshot. Talk about a snapshot in time. That's 1 year, right?
So yeah,
But they go, the 7.25 is based on what kind of running year average?
that's what, for the contributions that they're asking their member agencies to make is based on 7.25.
I know that. But what I'm saying is they figure that based on a running average of, what, 3 years, you say, Rebecca? 30 years.
They amortize their history, or they look at their history over a long period of time to come up with that rate.
Okay. Is it realistic?
Well, that's one of the things that CalPERS board has been working on. And we'll get to that, some of the changes that they've made. They've made a lot of changes in their assumptions over the last 5 to 7 years, which have increased our costs.
So as a quick comment to what happens with the good years and the bad years, CalPERS will actually take a bad year and amortize that loss, the differential between the 7.25 and whatever they actually got, over a fixed period of time. And they'll do the same thing with the gain. So everybody, let's suggest that they do actually get 16% for the entire year. Right now, it's only for the 6-month period. If they can actually pull that off for an entire year, everybody wouldn't see the 9% above the 7.25. It would be something that would be a benefit that gets amortized out over time. They're trying to minimize the shock of what the annual contribution would be. Okay? So one of the things that we are very interested in making sure that policymakers understand is what the projected real payment or contribution is going to be for any city over time. CalPERS puts out in their reports their projections based on the implied 7.25% and dropping down to 7% investment returns based on what the city already is contributing for. There's different what we call bases, and those are the different colors on this graphic. You can see where the contribution, where your total expense is anticipated to go. So right now, the city is contributing just over $5 million a year into the plan, and it is expected in 5 years to be about $7 million, and it will peak, all things being equal, all the assumptions being equal, it should peak in about 10 years at $8 million. And then as some of these bases are now paid off, the contribution will be theoretically coming down off the back end.
Question about that. Those projections about annual contribution levels, are they based on third party or your own projections of rates of return, or are they based on what CalPERS is sort of officially denoting as what their targets are?
100% on what CalPERS is stating.
It's basically all looking at CalPERS?
Yes.
Fine, thank you.
So this graphic is broken out into the different portions of your rates. As you can see what the assumptions are, some on the right. You've got your miscellaneous plan, you've got the Belmont San Carlos joint venture, you've got the Redwood City and the safety plan, longevity. All of those are playing into this, and you can see based on the different color codes which ones are moving and which ones are not. This has been very effective with a lot of other city councils in trying to help them frame the question or frame the conversation about a long-term budget plan, the general fund, and or how it applies to some of your other partnerships. So what are the key takeaways from that? You've got, as I mentioned, the unfunded liability has risen between 35 and 45% over the last couple of years. As Rebecca just mentioned, that's been primarily due to some major assumption changes that, along with their more recent investment returns, have really compounded a problem for most member agencies. You have longevity issues, you've got investment earnings, and what we have seen from a lot of member agencies is you now have a smaller labor force, your smaller employment base, so the contributions are actually becoming a bigger part of your budget. One of the things that we were asked to analyze as part of our research was what can be done with this unfunded liability in conjunction with the financial analysis that we did for the city on your reserve balances and your existing fund balances that you had. This concept of taking some of your identified reserves and applying them towards a pay down of a pension liability can be thought of really in a couple of different ways. The first one is financial. What is the impact of taking city dollars today that we have that are earning 0.5% or 1% in your current either LAIF or the county pool, and putting them into the system and earning the implied rate or the imputed rate that CalPERS has for any dollars that are sitting inside of its trust. The other is evaluating whether those funds that you have, should they be deemed available to affect your cash flow going forward. As I mentioned that on that prior chart, you saw the gradual rise in what the contribution amounts will be, all things being equal. Is there any impact or benefit to applying reserves today to try to change the shape of that graphic. So one of the things that we looked at is, as an example, taking $7.5 million and applying it as option number one, putting it all towards the CalPERS contribution, and what kind of benefit would you get out of that. The second one is to applying that money into a Section 115 trust. And the way a Section 115 trust, just for the city's education, is it really becomes kind of a locally controlled. The city controls it through a trust administrator, but the 115 has the flexibility of being either just held and invested and have it grow as an asset to offset your pension liability. It can be then drawn down to either make benefits payments or to be used to pay contributions to CalPERS. So it is locked up. You don't have the ability to apply it to any other use other than pension, but it is controlled and invested at a local level, not at Sacramento's level, where the contributions you make to Sacramento right now are all put at the board level for CalPERS in terms of what they may invest in. And we've had some city councils who've said, we don't like what's going on in Sacramento. Is there any way we can control a portion of these funds? And a 115 trust would allow you then to make certain decisions on how aggressive you want to have the trust administrator invest the funds. So what did these two options end up generating? We have calculated that if you were to take $7.5 million and you were to put 5 of it towards the unfunded liabilities, so send $5 million of it to Sacramento, the orange line on the chart demonstrates what we believe the new contribution amounts would be after those funds were already in place. We are assuming that this would occur during the current fiscal year, so you would be credited with the 7.25% investment return for this year as opposed to 7%, which will happen in fiscal year 18-19. And as you can see, the blue that's kind of above the orange line represents effectively an annual savings of about $500,000 a year, $400 in the first year, growing to about $650. It nets about $4.2 million in savings to the city. So call it interest earning savings, but the benefit of $5 million is effectively a $9.2 million change in the payments to CalPERS. The $2.5 million, if you were to choose to put it into the 115 trust, and again, assuming a more conservative earnings rate of 4%, would save approximately $900 to or $1 million over the next 10 years. So it would be, again, an asset that is going to grow parallel to the unfunded liability in CalPERS, but would be more beneficial to the city than just simply holding those funds in your existing reserves, even if you dedicated them to the pension. The CalPERS would get the kicker of having a more aggressive investment return. So what are the considerations and what were what was our takeaway from the analysis that we did? Your city fund reserves are extremely high. You're to be congratulated for that you've come out of the 2008 recession clearly in a position where you are accumulating fund balances at a level that I think many of our other city clients would be very envious of. We do think that there strategically is a good argument for taking a portion of these fund balances and applying them towards this unfunded liability. As you've probably seen and heard from staff over the last couple of years, the unfunded liability number is growing at a much faster clip than anybody can keep up with. And so the only way that we are really seeing, or the most effective way we are seeing to mitigate that, is being able to take specific buckets of money and making buy downs or contributions greater than just what your normal payment is in order to kind of redirect that accelerated UAL. We do think that with $7 million that you can actually make a significant impact to the contributions, which then will filter right down into your budget as effectively budget savings going forward. And we'd like to recommend the Section 115 trust only because it gives the city local control, and it gives the city the ability to put money into a trust that, again, can't be used for anything other than pension, either liabilities or benefits, but it does allow you then the flexibility to choose on an annual basis what you want to do, whether you want to contribute more into the trust or use funds from the trust to either pay CalPERS as a portion of the normal payment or go out in benefits. And we think the economics of both of those make a lot of sense for the city. So with that, I will, that's it.
Okay. Questions? Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I understand all the recommendations. What would be a poor decision on our part? What would we do that would not be wise? Leaving it where it is, just in a reserve account, not doing anything with it?
I think the probably the weakest option would be to leave it liquid in your reserve balances that are not currently not being actively invested at rates anywhere near what you get with money that gets put into trust funds, right? So trust funds take a long-term view. Even the Section 115 right now are getting 4%, north of 4%, which is significantly different than a LAIF contribution or even the county pool. I mean, we are seeing those interest earnings coming up, but the delta between the two is still pretty large. So if the city is confident that these reserve levels are sustainable and it truly is excess, then not applying it towards what your growing liabilities are would be probably the poor decision.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Grocott?
The assumption on the second option is 4% as far as return?
Yeah, conservatively,
As
right.
So can you give us a little background on where that 4% comes from?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because that's actually a conversation we've had quite a bit. From a policy perspective, I think the big conversation that's been coming up around pension trusts is should the investments be aggressive? Should you be in the equity market? Should CalPERS be speculating in commercial real estate and things like that? The Joe Nation is, come out on record a number of times stating that pensions should probably be invested in treasuries, right?
Joe Nation is?
He's an economist at Stanford who's done a lot of work on pension. So the 4% number is a number that a lot of those in the industry are using now as a kind of non-equity portfolio. So while any money that you give to CalPERS is invested without any input from the local level, right? They have their board and their own investment policy group that comes up with what they're going to invest in. With a 115, you have a trust administrator who will sit with staff, city staff, and say, what is your tolerance for risk? Do you want to be completely risk averse, in which case we'll suggest that you invest in this portfolio of, could be corporates, could be treasuries, it could be agency bonds, whatever. That's why we look at, there's a lot less risk, and most of these administrators, and we don't have any relationships with PARS or any, PFM is another provider of the 115 Trust Administration, but they will all generally tell you that you can take a much more conservative portfolio position and get 4% in the long term. It isn't what CalPERS is telling you at 7.25%, but it's also not yo-yoing like we get with
with the CalPERS portfolio.
And another question is what happens if we give our money to PERS and go that route? I've heard that there can be a problem with that because if you're one of, however many cities are in California that or part of CalPERS, and you do that, but then something happens in the future in Sacramento and they shuffle the cards, what you just did could potentially get lost. Can you speak to that?
I'm not sure exactly what you're talking specifically to. The question of whether
Craig,
if
I
I
can
can
speak
add
to
a little
that.
bit to that, it's because we're in a pool, so just tossing money into a pool, it doesn't affect you as directly as one might think. It affects the pool, and because you're in a pool with other cities, if they don't do the same thing, you've actually helped them out and not helped yourself out as much as you may have thought. So that's
Yeah. And a few years ago, that was the case.
Okay.
In the last 3 years, they've changed the way they do their reporting for those agencies in the pool. So they've carved out what the City of San Carlos portion is.
Oh, okay, all right.
They have a better idea of what ours is. We're not totally lumped in with everyone else.
Mr. Maltby?
And adding to it, council member, because I'm sure you recall a lot of the discussions around the fire dissolution on this particular issue. One of the big concerns back then was that if they had a really good year or a good set of years and your rates really came down and you had paid all this money in, then you'd kind of just be helping the pool out because everybody's rates really already went down anyway. That was before they instituted all the smoothing. So if there are good years, like they said earlier, it gets spread over 30 years. So they're trying to do everything they can from a pool perspective or an individual plan perspective to keep the big up and downs from happening within the system, which help address some of your concerns in the long run.
And through the chair, not for these folks here, but I'm wondering if we want to hear anything from our.
My mind. How'd you do
Okay,
that?
I don't know.
I see our city treasurer, Mr. Galvin, is in the audience. Mr. Galvin, would you like to come up and make comments or questions? Okay, fine. Just wanted to get your input. Wanted to make sure we had that. Thank you, Mr. Grocott. Appreciate you seeing him, although I did see him myself. Other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Olbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the things that struck me as I was getting ready for this evening's presentation, and is one of the reasons why I asked the presenter the question about where the projections or the data that they're based on, is, as he said, it all traces back to CalPERS. And I don't know about anybody else on this dais, I don't trust anything that CalPERS tells me. And the reason I don't trust anything that CalPERS tells me is because they have a well-established track record of having made some very, very bad calls in the first dot-com boom, some amazingly bad calls, which were then, we've spent quite a bit of time since then, the rest of us trying to dig our way out of. What would really help me, but certainly before I could make a rational choice about whether to pursue this creative option that was presented here, and I don't mean that as a fob off. I think actually is pretty creative and it looks like it might be interesting. But what I would really need to see is I need to have a better sense of what we believe, not what CalPERS is telling us, but what we believe based on our plans and what a reasonable person would take as a reasonable set of rate of returns, what our pension cost contributions are likely to be 5, 10, 15 years out, okay? Because that's the time horizon that we're talking about. I personally think that we ought to task staff with identifying some consulting resources. I wouldn't expect staff to be able to do this themselves, although if they want to take a shot at it, it's fine with me. To go off and do that and come back to us, don't do projections based on what CalPERS is saying. Do projections based on what CalPERS ought to be doing or ought to be saying, if they were being honest with us. And to me, that's the starting point for figuring out what we're going to do. Because if it turns out, to be perfectly frank, for me, if it turns out that the cost increases, the annual contribution cost increases between now and, say, 2028 is an extra $5 million a year in operating costs, I'm not sure I would do this deal that you're talking about. Because frankly, I think if we do our job as a council and as a city and grow the business of the city and grow the community and continue to see the kinds of things that we've done, we'll be able to cover that out of our normal revenues. We won't have to have put aside money at all. And instead, that money, which is currently talked about being put aside, could be used to do something else that might improve the quality of life for people today in San Carlos. But I can't judge that without getting a better sense than I'm ever going to get from CalPERS about what the future 5 or 10 or 15 years out looks like. So I don't know if anybody else is interested in that, but that's what I'd really like to see us do rather than just go through these exercises every year where we say, well, okay, CalPERS has now told us the new number is X. It's like, okay, great. I'm not trying to diminish the work staff's done. It's very important. I appreciate the update, but that's what's already happened. I want to get a sense of what's going to happen, not what has already happened.
I tend to agree that I have the same faith in CalPERS that you do, which is not really high. But the only caveat I have with your comment about getting someone to come in and tell us what the future is going to hold, you could get 3 different people telling us 3 different things. I mean, somebody would say CalPERS is being really conservative. CalPERS is off the charts, that should be 2%, or CalPERS is, like I said, conservative, it should be 12%. I guess, who do you believe, who do you trust on that? That's the only issue that I would have. It's going to be somebody or some company is going to go out and try to project out for the next 10 or 15 years, and I wouldn't want to bet too much money on that kind of an item anyway. But that's the only caveat I have with your second part of your comment.
Can I I'll be trying very briefly to respond to that. You're absolutely right, Bob. I mean, I've done a lot of planning, strategic and financial in my life. And the one thing that we always used to remind people and ourselves about is the plan is nothing. Planning is everything. Okay, so the one thing you can be guaranteed of is whatever number you come up with, that ain't going to be what's going to be there. Right. It's more identifying what the risk factors are, the trends, the issues. I mean, simply even knowing or getting, let's say, a general sense from several experts, yeah, CalPERS is probably wrong in these areas. That would help me, because then it would reinforce my belief of we need to do something different.
Well, I'm sure you could find somebody to tell you that CalPERS is wrong. I guarantee on that. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Craig, my question to you is, how many of these studies have you done? How many do you do each year? How do your findings compare to what CalPERS assumptions are when you do these?
So during the current fiscal year, this is probably our 15th analysis that we've looked at. And originally, the work we were doing for the city was purely on the financial and the capital side. This was kind of an add-on as we really started looking at uses for some of your reserves that got us into looking at the pension. We're not actuaries, right? We have brought actuaries in to answer some of these questions before. If you really want to model out different what-if scenarios, that they're exceptional at coming up with all kinds of different scenarios, whether it's investment or mortality rates, right? All of that is what really is whipsawing these numbers on a daily basis. I would say that the conversation you're having is in the majority of what most of our communities and the councils are having. It is, we don't necessarily believe what's coming out of Sacramento. All we're being told is we're having a big number that's coming our way that we need to figure out how to address. The conversation has turned to a little bit, we don't trust Sacramento. We want to take more money out of, or minimize the amount of our contributions into CalPERS and maybe maximize what we can put into a 115 trust, which we then feel like we can own and control and have a better idea of what it's going to do. Other than that, unfortunately, I don't think there is a unifying right answer for what is the perfect solution, other than doing something. right? I will say that we've had a couple who have said, this is bogus, we don't believe this. CalPERS is going to tell us tomorrow that we're super funded, we're going to be good. So we're going to just hold on to our money now because we see bigger issues with deferred capital and services and things like that. But there isn't one solution, perfect solution.
And if we know one thing, it's that CalPERS is predictably unpredictable.
Yes.
Right. And so maybe another look at it. Is there going to be much upside to that, you think?
Personally, I don't think so. I mean, I think that it is, we see the variance in CalPERS settling down a little bit, but it's still moving, right? It's still, I mean, even just this year, like I said, we've been doing these just in this current fiscal year, starting in the fall. And at that time, CalPERS was coming off a 0.2% investment return year, right? So everybody was, oh, this is terrible. This is why we got to get out of this. And then they just announced, I think in late January, that for the first 6 months, they were doing 16%. And they love to get that in the media, right? So then we're getting the calls from council members and city managers and staff saying, how does that affect everything we just talked about? They just earned 16%. But as Rebecca said, they don't just give that to you right away, right? That now gets amortized to slow it down and try to calm the seas, and it's the same thing on the losses and the gains. So they're trying to make it do a little bit less, or be a little less turbulent.
Okay.
I can
go ahead,
add
sorry.
my 2 cents, just for having dealt with PERS for decades. Certainly PERS made some very bad calls in the past. In recent years, setting aside their investment portfolio return, whether it's up, whether it's down, I'm not going to pass judgment on that. But they have been trying to do the right thing, but you end up having these competing interests, right? We all want them to get PERS right so that we're paying the right amount, we're not overpaying, we're not underpaying, we're not generating all that liability. There's a lot of cities in California, even today in this upcycle, that are struggling financially, and they can't afford the kinds of increases in their and PERS is sensitive to that, and they're trying to make a decision that can apply statewide to all the various PERS agencies. But there's 3 things that we know for sure right now. Unfolding for the last 30 years, their discount rate, even at 7%, is probably too high. It just isn't penciling when you look at the history. We know that there's still a problem with the average life expectancy of a retiree. The fact that people are living longer has a direct impact on how much they're taking out of the pool. And that's going to have to be adjusted. And I doubt there's anybody in the room who thinks, when we get to, 2035 or 2040, life expectancy isn't going to have gone up even more from where it's at today, which isn't high enough for the plan. And then the other dynamic that has a big impact is, and particularly when we see down cycles, every time we have a down cycle, local government in California is getting smaller and smaller. So the number of employees in the plan that we're paying for is shrinking. And that puts more of a premium per employee in terms of the cost. So I could almost guarantee you that whatever that curve looks like today, the curve probably looks very similar to the shape, but it's probably higher. Leaving prepayment and all those issues that you're talking about tonight aside. Those are the things that we know the board, CalPERS board, is agendizing and has been talking about, and they have been making progress on. But they've also very openly spoken about, wanting to respect the agency members' ability to pay and not just, jack it all up in 2 or 3 or 4 years. This is, what happened in the early 00s with the major retirement enhancements and giveaways was akin to a really bad mortgage. And we're in the middle of paying that mortgage off. You can see on the curve, there's still time to go. We're making progress. As Councilmember Olbert pointed out, this is really about, at the end of the day, the thing that's most important to us is our ability to pay this year. If we get to a point where we don't have the ability to pay this year, that's a real problem. That's a today problem. So, whether or not, we think that, we can hit that bar in the future, it's not money that you're giving away. If you prepay and you're kind of getting 2 for 1 over time in terms of your dollar, that's an investment, but it comes at an opportunity cost. You can't spend that money on other infrastructure projects that you need to do in the city. The good news is, to the ability that you're throwing off fund balance and increasing your reserve potential or your annual savings, which gets reinvested under other funds, prepaying means you're bringing down your future PERS cost. Whatever you would be paying next year is going to be less, and you can take that money and put it into your capital fund. It's not $7 million, it's $500,000. So that's really the trade-off of what we're talking about here in terms of, but I can tell you without any hesitation, our liability is greater than what's being shown here if you want to talk about sort of real-world PERS analysis. I think the OPEB, other post-employment benefits for you, Mr. Mayor, liabilities are much more accurate. They're done with our own actuarial based just on our city retiree population, whereas with CalPERS, we're really dependent on their numbers because we're part of a pool.
Right.
And so we could analyze our own retirees and our own employees all we want, but without the pool data, we wouldn't be informed about what's happening at PERS.
Okay. Mr. Grocott, last comment?
Last comment is,
Or question?
if we want to take action on this, we're going to have to agendize it. I certainly would be interested in that. I don't know if we
Yeah,
have
I would
others.
also be interested in agendizing this item.
What are we talking about agendizing?
Whether the recommendation from staff should be upheld or there should be something different put to it.
Okay, personally, I'm not interested in agendizing that until after we've had some discussion and get some more information about what we think is actually the state of the future.
Okay. That's, so far we have 2. Anyone else?
I'll agree that we should agendize it.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
Wouldn't this be taken up just as a normal part of the biannual budget process?
So I think the timing of the recommendation to do the pay down for CalPERS needs to be done in this fiscal year to maximize the interest rate.
Okay.
So we need to bring that forward sooner.
Okay. Then I'm in favor of it as well.
Is there anyone, to give you an opportunity, Mr. Olbert, is there anyone else wishing to follow Mr. Olbert's idea that we go out and get another, or a couple of, or how many people to give us another option or another opinion? Okay. All right, I guess we'll agendize this in the future then. Okay, thank you. Didn't mean to be brusque with you, but sometimes it just drives you crazy. When working with numbers all my life too, it gets a little crazy sometimes. So.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
He was actually being nice.
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Are we, did we skip this item here?
No, we didn't.
Oh.
Chief Rothus spoke to it.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah.
What?
All right. Moving on. Item 8A, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing a financial contribution to the San Mateo County Gun Buyback Program. Ms. Costa-Sanders.
Thank you. I double-checked my presentation. There's no acronyms and no numbers.
Thank you.
Good evening. The item before you is consideration of a financial contribution to San Mateo County Gun Buyback Program. The citizens for San Mateo County are requesting that jurisdictions help fund this event. The funds will be used to purchase guns, and the Sheriff's Office is going to fully manage the event. So that includes securing an event location, staffing the event, doing any necessary advertising, as well as destroying all guns that are turned in at the event. And then the excess funds that are generated from this fundraising effort that are not used at the event will either go to a future event or will be put towards gun safety education. So the item before you tonight is to determine the contribution amount you would like to make towards this event, and then adopt a resolution authorizing the financial contribution to the program. Danielle Lacapagnana, I probably messed that up, representative for Citizens for San Mateo County Gun Buyback, is also here and would like to give the council a very brief presentation. And she can also provide an update on the funding that's been requested and the action on other jurisdictions. And then also from the Sheriff's Office is Mark Dury, who can respond to other questions on the program. So I'll let Daniela speak now, and then I can answer questions that you may have.
Danielle, la campagna. It's Italian, I get it.
Good evening, Mayor Grisilli, Vice Mayor Johnson, and council members. I'm here today as a member of a volunteer group called Citizens for a San Mateo County Gun Buyback. Our group approached San Mateo County Sheriff Bolanos in February to suggest that San Mateo County put on another large-scale gun buyback. I think it is safe to say that we are all motivated to find ways to prevent guns from getting into the wrong hands. We are happy that we are now collaborating with Sheriff Bolanos to put on a gun buyback. The buyback will likely be May 5th, and you saw a letter that we provided from Sheriff Bolanos. The San Mateo County Sheriff's Office has offered their time and experience, as was just spoken about. And we're happy to have Captain Mark Dury here tonight, and he will lead the Sheriff's Office in these efforts. And our group, Citizens for a San Mateo County Gun Buyback, has the honor of securing the funds, as you heard. In 2013, at the San Mateo County Gun Buyback, hundreds of guns were surrendered. 100 was given for handguns, shotguns, rifles, and 200 for assault-type weapons. Given that, we'll need approximately $75,000 to adequately manage the need. And we're here tonight to respectfully ask that you support this event, and specifically that you contribute $5,000 or more towards the upcoming gun buyback. As you see from this slide, the street sweeper was the most dangerous weapon turned in at the San Mateo County Gun Buyback in 2013. According to this YouTube video, it's called San Mateo County Gun Buyback Sweet Streeper. It has the previous sheriff describing why it's so deadly. We're not going to play it. It's just 40 seconds if you want to look at it at some point, but it's quite impressive. This gun buyback will exchange cash funds for the voluntary surrender of firearms while engaging the community towards a common goal of reducing gun violence. The San Mateo County Sheriff's Office will secure a neutral location in the county and where individuals can surrender their firearms, no questions asked. A gun buyback removes weapons from homes that could be utilized for suicide, domestic violence, and homicide. Suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States, according to the CDC, which is Center for Disease Control and Prevention. In 2015, there were twice as many suicides, which were 44,193 suicides in the United States as compared to homicides of 17,793. And this chart shows that of those suicides, 22,018 were by firearms, close to half of the suicides that year. There are more gun suicides than gun homicides in America. In 2013, according to the CDC, 21,175 people committed suicide by firearm, while 11,208 people died in gun homicides. Most gun-related homicides, gun-related deaths, about 2/3 in America, are suicides. According to the San Mateo County Coroner's 2016 annual report, the total number of suicides in San Mateo County in 2016 was 68. 25 of those were from firearms, and the total number of homicides that year were 7, and 5 of those were from gunshots. Just to cite a couple studies. There's a study in 2013 that was published about the relationship between gun ownership and firearm homicide rates in the United States. And for each percentage point increase in gun ownership, the firearm homicide rate increased by 0.9%. States with the higher rates of gun ownership had disproportionately large numbers of deaths from firearm-related homicides. Another study in 2014 was of 3 cities, and it concluded that the buybacks are one-pronged to a multi-pronged approach in reducing firearm violence. Almost 70% reported turning in their firearm because of safety reasons. Of those who cited safety reasons, only 59% had training. 54% of firearms relinquished were acquired through inheritance, gift, or random find. A buyback would allow for a venue to surrender unwanted guns safely. In at least one city, as many as 30% of those weapons used in gun-wielding criminal acts were burglarized from homes. A study out of Connecticut in 2015 found that the individuals who turned in guns at gun buyback events and the individuals who committed suicide are similar in age, as well as they're predominantly white and male. Medium caliber handguns account for the majority of crime and fatalities, and buyback programs collected smaller caliber handguns. Buyback programs are an opportunity to remove unwanted handguns from the community and from the homes of individuals at increased risk of suicide. So with your financial support, we can be successful in this endeavor to remove many guns from circulation and make the streets of San Mateo County safer for those who live and work here. We have approached almost all cities and towns in San Mateo County with a very similar financial request, and we've received very positive responses with commitments from Redwood City and San Mateo. And we are on the agenda at council meetings tomorrow night at Belmont and Woodside, and in Foster City next week, and we are anticipating getting direct commitments or being on the agenda at many other cities in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Okay, there may be some other questions later on. Captain Jury, did you have anything that you wanted to add? No, I don't. Okay. Well, then I'll ask a first question. Did you get, when you went to the other cities, did they commit dollars? Redwood City and San Mateo?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'll ask
How
the second.
much?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I
apologize.
believe in San Mateo it is 5,000, and in Redwood City, I believe it's the same, but not entirely. Minimum of 5,000 for
Great,
Redwood City.
great. Okay, thank you. All right, questions, Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Danielle. Good presentation. One thought I had, I just wanted to get your sense of, is in terms of your marketing program, so to speak, of encouraging communities to do this, would some kind of structure, like if we were to commit funds on a matching fund basis, would that help, hurt? Have no idea? You know, just what's your reaction to that?
Well, that could be helpful. I would think that could be helpful. We are really looking at city councils first because we want it to be kind of a galvanizing event, and we feel like it's a reasonable ask.
Oh, sorry, what I meant is matching. In other words, we would, the idea would be we would match whatever Redwood City, San Mateo, whatever put in.
Oh, okay.
Not as an individual match, right? That's a different
Right.
thing.
No, that sounds good. That sounds, I mean, I'm not a financial person, I'm not a salesperson, but it sounds like it would be good, and maybe Nilu can speak to that too. She's also from our citizen group.
I think that would be helpful. I think the more cities that sign on earlier, the better. And there's no reason that a match wouldn't encourage other people to sign on. And we're actually hoping that the more the cities give, that we can go to the Board of Supervisors and ask them to match.
There you go. Okay, great. Mr. Collins, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Daniela. Nice presentation. What happens if the Sheriff's Department gets more than $75,000? What if the cities collectively gave 100 or 120,000? Does that change anything?
That would be a great problem to have, first of all. We do foresee these events, we talked about that with the Sheriff's Office, and we do foresee it being something that we would like to say for another buyback at a different time as a possibility, or as Lisa had mentioned, for some education in the area.
Do we get into a situation of diminishing returns if you have too many of these buyback programs, or
Well, the last one on this scale was in 2013. That was done by the Sheriff's Office, is my understanding. There have been some other smaller ones, like there was one in Daly City that was fairly small this past fall.
And
Right.
having another one in May. So they seem to think that there's plenty of guns to be.
so if they did it every couple of years or so, you think it might continue to be as successful?
I
just
would
threw
think,
out a
I would
couple of
think
years.
so.
I don't know
Well,
if
we've
what the-
done quite a bit of research in this area, and just it looks like they're being done repeatedly in different areas in more greater frequency than we have them. So we believe it would be successful to have it be a repeated event.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Olbert, another question? Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to make a motion, but you.
But we have public that have to speak, so. Okay. I have some speaker cards here. If there's no other questions from the dais. Michelle Sorrell? I'd like to keep your comments here about 2 minutes if you could, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'll be very brief. My name is Michelle Sorrell, and I'm a resident of San Carlos. And I would encourage you to vote to fund the gun buyback program being put on by Sheriff Bolano's office. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Rebecca Dodson.
Hi, I'll be brief too. I'm Becky, San Carlos resident, member of Citizens for San Mateo County Gun Buyback. I simply want to ask that you fund this important event. I think it's a small amount that would go a long way, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nilu Jenks.
Hi, I'm also a member of Citizens for San Mateo County Gun Buyback, and I just wanted to say that I'm also a San Carlos citizen, and that I'm very proud that our city was the first to agendize this item, though we had a slight advantage. But I would be really happy that while Redwood City and San Mateo has already committed funds through their city manager and staff, for us to be the first city to vote to fund this matter
Great.
at our city council. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mary Ree. Welcome.
So my name is Dr. Mary Ree, and I'm a pediatrician and a San Carlos resident. I fully voice my support for this program. The American Academy of Pediatrics says, quote, "The most effective way to prevent firearm-related injuries to children is to keep guns out of homes and communities." We do know that depressed teenagers or adults, when they become suicidal, the risk of suicide is 4 to 10 times higher in homes with guns than in those without. So the AAP recommends that parents of adolescents at risk for suicide or depression, they remove guns and ammunition from their homes. So I really support this measure as a way to provide opportunities for families to dispose of their guns safely. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Kathy Baird.
I'm a resident of San Carlos, and I just wanted to add my support for funding this gun buyback initiative in the county.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Okay.
Now can I make my motion?
Now you can make your motion.
Thank you. No.
I know it's been.
Oh, sorry, I just pressed the button too soon. No, great comments. And actually, by the way, if anybody's interested in, Seth Rosenblatt, who's a member of our community, posted a very interesting article on his website, rosenblatt.org, talking about something called hindsight bias as it relates to gun control thinking, and it's definitely worth reading. But in terms of a motion, I'd like to move that we contribute, the city of San Carlos contribute $25,000 as a matching fund for matching contributions made by other communities to this program.
Would it be like up to $25,000? Is that your? Or?
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Sorry.
Up to $25,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, just to go through it, we need a second. I'm sorry, we need a second to that motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, moved and seconded. So basically, it would be if the other folks come up with the other cities and so on come up with 25,000, we'd match it. The cumulative.
Mr. Mayor, can I offer a competing motion?
Sure.
Since we have the money, I would like us to authorize 50,000. I think, and there's a reason for this. I think this could be set a clear example. It can encourage a lot of other cities to do it, and that's one of the reasons I asked the questions. If more money is raised, you have more gun buybacks. That's not a bad thing. So I want to see if I can get a second, but the money's in the budget for this. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't spend up to 50,000.
Okay, thank you. I didn't quite hear the number originally. Thank you.
Is there a second to Mr. Collins' motion? Okay.
Rule of order question.
Yes.
Since I moved the first one, am I allowed to second the the revised motion?
Yes, you can.
I will second Ron's motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Okay, discussion. Well, I certainly, I certainly support money to do this, and I certainly understand Mr. Collins's enthusiasm for the amount. However, I feel Mr. Olbert's first motion is a little more practical to the fact of matching the 25, and I think we'll come up with that 25. I just think it's a little bit more prudent. I know we have the money, we always have the money, but I just believe that the 25 is a little bit more in perspective of what we're doing here. So that's just my comment. So I won't be voting for the 50, but I would be voting for the 25. Other comments? Hearing none, I guess we'll have a roll call on Mr. Collins's vote, or motion rather.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Putting me in an awkward position of being financially in one way or the other, but I have to honestly believe that the 25 is a little more in perspective. So I'm going to vote no. I'm going to sound like some of my colleagues up here where I'm voting no, but I really want this to happen. But I can't in good conscience vote for the 50, so I'll have to vote no. But it passes 3-2. So that's what we'll do. Up to 50,000 matching, and hopefully you'll get the rest of these folks to pony up, and it'll really be a good thing. And again, I hope everybody understands where I was coming from. I hope, and if not, well, that's the way that it is. So, all right, moving on.
I didn't understand. Can you
Yeah, I didn't understand. Thanks a lot, Mark. You're really helping me here. What do you want to say since you won already?
I just want to say thank you.
Okay, great, sure. Okay, super. I remember I was for giving money. Yeah, I know, I could still change my vote. I'd be like the Assembly or the Senate the next day, just hit the button. Until we haven't got the buttons yet, Crystal, and don't get those buttons.
You supported 25 to 50.
That's right, 25 to 50, right, exactly. All right, moving on. Number 9A, council members' reports on subcommittees, regional boards, commissions, and committees. Anyone have anything to say? All right, hearing none. Mr. Maltby, does staff have anything tonight?
Nothing this evening, Mr. Mayor.
All right, if there's nothing, then I guess we will adjourn. And again, I compliment my fellow council members for the amounts that are about relative to the gun buyback program, and I'm sure it's going to be very successful. And I'm happy to support the amounts that we are doing. So thank you.